Europe. The name conjures images of ancient capitals, bustling financial districts, and a union of nations striving for collective prosperity. We see the iconic skylines of Berlin, Paris, and Rome, the institutional grandeur of Brussels, and the industrial might that once powered a continent. But beneath this veneer of stability, a silent structural deterioration is underway, a process far more insidious than any sudden crash. This isn't a single dramatic crisis capturing headlines, but rather a slow, relentless erosion, a series of accumulating pressures that threaten to redefine Europe's place in the global economic order. We're not talking about a cyclical downturn that will eventually correct itself. Instead, Europe is grappling with 6 deeply embedded wounds, each feeding into the others, creating a cumulative effect that demands urgent attention. The first, and perhaps most immediately felt, is the wound of expensive and unstable energy. For decades, Europe's industrial engine relied heavily on a steady, affordable supply of fossil fuels, often from politically volatile regions. This historical dependency, once a source of cheap power, has become a crippling vulnerability. The recent shocks to global energy markets have sent costs skyrocketing, creating an unbearable burden for both industries and everyday consumers. Imagine a factory, once a beacon of efficiency, now struggling to keep its lights on, its machinery running as energy bills consume an ever larger slice of its budget. This isn't just about higher utility bills, it's about a fundamental loss of global competitiveness. Industries that once thrived on European soil are now looking elsewhere, to regions where energy is plentiful and predictable. The dream of a green transition, while noble, has also introduced its own set of complexities, further destabilizing an already precarious energy landscape. This leads us directly to the second wound, gradual deindustrialization. As energy costs bite and regulations tighten, Europe's manufacturing heartland is slowly hollowing out. Factories, once the backbone of national economies, are migrating to regions offering cheaper labor, fewer bureaucratic hurdles, and crucially more affordable energy. This isn't a sudden exodus, but a steady trickle, a quiet erosion of Europe's productive base. Think of the once thriving industrial zones, now dotted with abandoned plants or repurposed spaces. The decline in manufacturing output isn't just a statistic. It represents lost jobs, diminished innovation, and a weakening of the technical skills that underpin a robust economy. The continent that pioneered the Industrial Revolution is now witnessing its industrial core slowly unravel, piece by painful piece. Then there's the third and perhaps most difficult to reverse wound, unfavorable demography. Europe is aging, and rapidly. Birth rates have been falling for decades, while life expectancy continues to rise. This demographic shift means a shrinking workforce supporting an ever-growing population of retirees. Picture the strain on public services. Pension systems facing insolvency, healthcare infrastructures buckling under increased demand, and a dwindling pool of young talent to drive innovation and productivity. This isn't just an abstract challenge. It's a profound imbalance that puts immense pressure on public finances and social cohesion. Who will pay the taxes? Who will staff the hospitals and schools? The demographic clock is ticking, and its rhythm is a slow, steady drumbeat of impending crisis. The fourth wound, exacerbating all others, is political and decisional fragmentation. The very strength of the European Union, its diversity and democratic nature, can also be its Achilles heel. Reaching swift, coordinated decisions among 27 member states, each with its own national interests and priorities, is a monumental task. When external shocks hit, whether they be economic downturns, geopolitical crises, or pandemics, Europe's response often appears slow, cumbersome, and at times contradictory. This isn't a failure of intention, but a structural impediment to agility. Imagine a ship with multiple captains, each wanting to steer in a slightly different direction. The result is often a meandering course, slow to react to storms, and unable to seize opportunities with the necessary speed. This lack of unified purpose makes it incredibly difficult to address the deep-seated structural issues that plague the continent. This inability to act decisively feeds into the fifth wound, increasing external dependence. Europe, for all its historical power and influence, has become remarkably reliant on external forces for its fundamental needs. Supply chains, optimized for cost efficiency over resilience, stretch across continents, making the continent vulnerable to disruptions anywhere along the line. We saw this starkly during the pandemic, when shortages of critical goods exposed the fragility of this interconnectedness. This dependence isn't limited to physical goods, it extends to energy, as previously discussed, but also to crucial technologies and even capital. Much of the innovation that drives global economies now originates elsewhere, leaving Europe in a position of technological followership rather than leadership. This growing reliance on external energy, external technology, and external markets creates a profound geopolitical vulnerability. When global powers shift, or when trade relations sour, Europe finds itself exposed, with limited levers to protect its own interests. This isn't just about economic metrics, it's about a loss of strategic autonomy, a quiet surrender of control over its own destiny. The continent that once projected power globally now often finds itself at the mercy of global currents it can no longer fully command. Finally, we arrive at the sixth wound: structural low growth. For years, Europe has grappled with anemic economic expansion, a stagnation that predates recent crises. This isn't just a cyclical downturn, it's a deeply embedded structural issue. Investment in innovation, the lifeblood of modern economies, often lags behind competitors. Bureaucracy can stifle entrepreneurship, and risk aversion can deter the bold ventures necessary for breakthrough growth. While individual European nations boast world-class companies and research institutions, the overall ecosystem struggles to translate these strengths into sustained, high-impact economic growth across the Union. This persistent low growth means fewer opportunities for its citizens, less revenue for public services, and a gradual erosion of Europe's economic relevance on the global stage. While other regions surge ahead, propelled by dynamic economies and rapidly expanding populations, Europe risks being left behind, its once dominant economic engine sputtering. The dream of a unified, prosperous Europe, capable of competing with any global power, begins to fade under the weight of this persistent economic lethargy. This isn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, almost imperceptible decline, like a grand old ship slowly losing speed against a relentless current. These six wounds: expensive and unstable energy, gradual deindustrialization, unfavorable demography, political fragmentation, increasing external dependence, and structural low growth, do not operate in isolation. They are intricately linked, each exacerbating the others in a destructive feedback loop. High energy costs accelerate deindustrialization, which further weakens the tax base needed to support an aging population. Political fragmentation hinders effective responses to these challenges, making Europe more dependent on external forces, which in turn stifles the innovation needed for robust growth. This isn't a series of independent problems that can be tackled one by one. It's a systemic affliction. Addressing one wound without considering its connection to the others is like trying to patch a single hole in a sinking ship while ignoring the multiple other leaks. Solutions that might work in isolation are often rendered ineffective when faced with the compounded pressures of these mutually reinforcing issues. This is the crucial distinction. Europe isn't facing a cyclical crisis that will eventually pass, but a deep-seated structural weakening. The economic malaise isn't a temporary fever, it's a chronic condition. The continent's foundational strengths are being slowly eroded, not by a single cataclysmic event, but by the relentless cumulative pressure of these intertwined challenges. What makes this situation particularly precarious is the collective blind spot, the pervasive illusion of stability that often accompanies established institutions. Despite the mounting evidence, many still haven't fully grasped the gravity of Europe's predicament. The grand capitals, the gleaming financial districts, the enduring cultural heritage, all contribute to a facade of resilience, masking the structural erosion occurring beneath the surface. It's easy to mistake the continued existence of familiar structures for genuine strength, to assume that because the lights are still on and the trains are still running, everything must fundamentally be all right. This institutional inertia, coupled with a natural human tendency to resist uncomfortable truths, creates a significant barrier to effective action. Political leaders, often constrained by short electoral cycles, find it challenging to implement the deep, unpopular structural reforms necessary to address these long-term issues. The immediate comfort of maintaining the status quo frequently outweighs the distant, yet critical need for radical change. This illusion of stability is perhaps the most insidious aspect of Europe's current trajectory. It fosters a sense of complacency, discouraging the urgent, coordinated effort required to mend these 6 fatal wounds. The European project, born from the ashes of war and built on the promise of peace and prosperity, now faces its most profound economic test, one that challenges its very foundations. The intricate web of regulations, the complex decision-making processes, and the delicate balance of national interests, while designed for stability, now contribute to a sluggishness that prevents swift adaptation. The world outside Europe is moving at an unprecedented pace, driven by technological revolutions and shifting geopolitical landscapes. While Europe deliberates, others innovate. While Europe seeks consensus, others forge ahead. The continent's historical strengths, its social safety nets, its commitment to environmental stewardship, its rich cultural diversity, are undeniable. However, these virtues, when coupled with economic stagnation and structural vulnerabilities, risk becoming liabilities in a fiercely competitive global arena. The question then becomes not if, but when this model will reach its breaking point. How long can a continent sustain high living standards and extensive social provisions with dwindling industrial output, an aging workforce, and an increasing reliance on external powers? How long can political fragmentation persist in the face of existential economic threats? The answer is not a simple date on a calendar, but a dynamic process that will unfold over the coming years. It's a slow burn, not an explosion. The signs are already there, the whispers of degrowth becoming louder, the increasing calls for protectionism, the growing unease among businesses struggling to compete. These are not isolated incidents, but symptoms of a deeper ailment. The path forward, if there is to be one that avoids severe decline, requires a profound shift in perspective. It demands an honest acknowledgement of the structural weaknesses, a willingness to make difficult choices, and a renewed commitment to innovation and adaptability. It means confronting the uncomfortable reality that the economic engine that once powered Europe to global prominence is now sputtering, and that incremental fixes will no longer suffice. The future of Europe's economy, and by extension its global standing, hinges on whether it can shed this illusion of stability and embrace the painful yet necessary process of reinvention. The clock is ticking, and the cumulative weight of these 6 wounds is pressing ever heavier on the continent's future. The grandeur of its past cannot indefinitely sustain the challenges of its present,